People in northeastern Japan have spent nearly 2 years getting over what they lost and in getting back on their feet. Next Monday marks the second anniversary of the earthquake, tsunami and nuclear accident. The disaster killed nearly 16,000 people. About 2,700 others are still listed as missing. People across the northeast are moving forward on a path to recovery. They've worked to rebuild their homes, their communities and their lives. We'll be spending the lead up to March the 11th looking at how far they've come and the challenges that still lie ahead. And perhaps the biggest one is the damaged nuclear plant in Fukushima. Areas around the facility shown here in red are still off limits. About 160,000 people from Fukushima Prefecture are still unable to go home. The earthquake and tsunami triggered a total blackout at Fukushima Daiichi. Workers with Tokyo Electric Power Company were unable to keep the fuel inside the reactors cool. Meltdowns happened inside 3 of the facility's 6 reactors. The temperature of the fuel continued to rise. Hydrogen built up and sparked explosions. The blast damaged reactor buildings and released massive amounts of radiation into the environment. 2 years on, TEPCO officials say the situation is stable. They say water circulation systems are keeping the nuclear fuel cool. And they say the plant is no longer releasing significant amounts of radioactive materials. Crews will one day dismantle and decommission the 4 crippled reactors. Japanese leaders have announced the entire operation could take up to 40 years. But TEPCO engineers admit they have no firm timeline and no firm plan for moving the molten fuel. NHK World's Yoichiro Tateiwa spoke with the utility's top official in charge of nuclear power.
Akira Kawano has been an engineer at TEPCO for almost 30 years. He was in charge of safety at Fukushima Daiichi before the accident. Now he supervised the decommissioning process.
What do you think the most difficult part, the difficult element concerning the decommissioning process?
2 difficult challenges. The one is how to understand the inside the reactor pressure vessel and the primary containment vessel, and to remove the molten fuel debris from the unit 1 through 3. The other challenge is that how to cope with waste. It's a liquid waste and solid waste. How to treat them and how to safely store it for a long time.
TEPCO engineers are still trying to understand the situation inside the reactors. They are using fiber optic scopes and closed-circuit cameras to gather images of the damage. They are also using computer simulations to determine the condition of the molten fuel. But high levels of radiation are slowing things down. Workers can only go into reactor buildings for 5 to 10 minutes at a time.
We haven't understood well how those molten fuel debris are distributed and located. We need to sample the debris, and we need to understand the mechanical characteristics and chemical characteristics of the debris. So otherwise, we cannot develop the necessary tool to retrieve the debris. I hope we'd like to understand something about it within a couple of years. It takes a long time it's difficult to achieve it.
Can we really say that the decommissioning process will end within 40 years?
It's very difficult to talk about such a far future, but it's really takes a time, actually. So even just for the removal of the debris, and it takes 10 years or more, I think. And you know, the half-life of for example, the cesium is 30 years. So at some part of the decommissioning we need to wait. The radiation will be reduced.
There are different ways to decommission a nuclear plant, but they all involve risks. Given the state of Fukushima Daiichi, Kawano and his team need to account for unprecedented challenges when they choose options. He believes TEPCO executives will have to discuss it with stakeholders and explain the risks of the options before they decide what course of action they should take.
We really need to improve our capability of the risk communication in future. That's also our challenge. Regarding also the decommissioning, we need to share that information.
Another major issue, as Kawano mentioned, is the toxic waste on site at Fukushima Daiichi. Every day, 400 tons of groundwater seeps into the highly radioactive units. Engineers pump it from buildings and into special tanks. They're in a constant race to build enough storage capacity to prevent any leaks into the environment.
It's really impossible just to continuously accumulate that water in the tank. It's not a reasonable way. So we need to think about the possibility of discharge or the other alternative ways, like evaporation or something like that.
TEPCO engineers are planning to introduce a new device. They say it's capable of removing all radioactive isotopes from the water. Kawano says the manager needs to talk to local residents in order to decide how to resolve this problem. Looking ahead, engineers have started updating the decommissioning roadmap. The government pledged the entire process would take 40 years. Right now, there is no concrete plan in place to fit that timeline. Yoichiro Tateiwa, NHK World.
Tokyo Electric Power Company says about 1,000 firms have not renewed contracts with the utility because they object to higher electricity charges. The firm asked its corporate customers to accept an average rise of 15% last April. TEPCO is struggling financially. Its reliance on energy imports has increased since the March 2011 accident at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. It says most of the 217,600 companies and factories that had to renew contracts by the end of January have agreed to the rise in electricity charges. But about 1,000 of them are still using electricity without paying their bills. TEPCO plans to seek their understanding for the increase by explaining its cost-cutting measures. It says some corporate customers who renewed their contracts have complained about firms obtaining free electricity. TEPCO says it'll have to cut off companies that do not renew their contracts for a long time.
U.S. authorities have decided to use a Japanese government fund for disposal of ocean debris created by the tsunami that hit its northeastern region in March 2011. Some parts of the large floating debris field have already reached the Pacific coast of North America. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says it will use part of the $5 million donated by the Japanese government to dismantle a floating dock that drifted from Japan. The huge dock was found in the state of Washington in December last year. The dismantling work is estimated to cost $630,000, of which nearly $480,000 will be covered by the Japanese donation. NOAA officials say the rest of the Japanese fund will be distributed to 5 states facing the Pacific to help them clean up tsunami debris in the future. One estimate has roughly 1.5 million tons of tsunami debris from the disaster 2 years ago drifting across the Pacific Ocean.
The World Health Organization says people in the areas most affected by the nuclear disaster in Fukushima have a higher risk of developing certain types of cancer. But they say there has been no observable increase in cancer rates in the wider population. The WHO experts based their report on soil and food data Japanese officials collected in the first 6 months after the disaster. They estimated that the lifetime risk of thyroid cancer among women exposed to radiation at age 1 has increased in the 2 locations near the plant that had the highest measurements of radiation. The report says the risk of cancer could increase by 68% in the town of Namie and 42% in the village of Iitate. But the experts said they do not anticipate any statistically meaningful increase in other areas. The WHO experts assumed residents continued to live in the same place for the 4 months following the accident. However, many residents evacuated immediately. The study also did not take into consideration food restrictions that were put in place. The WHO defended its methodology.
We took the risk of overestimating the risk because we thought it will be better to overestimate the risk rather than underestimate the risk.
The report calls for long-term monitoring and health screening for those who are exposed. Government officials at the national and local levels said the report was misleading and did not reflect reality.
I cannot accept it. The report is based on assumptions. It stirs up more concerns and hard feelings among the residents of my town.
Kano said the experts should not have named specific areas. He said officials in his town are doing everything possible to ensure the safety of residents.